Are you silver rich? How much silver puts you in the top 1% of silver stackers? Okay, so let's get straight into the episode. Silver bullion. What puts you in the top 1%, the top 5%, and the top 20% of silver bullion stackers? Think you have an idea? Well, let me tell you the figures. It may be quite surprising to the value of what percentage puts you in what category. Now, starting off at the very top of the scale, the top 1% of silver holders have around 500 ounces of silver bullion in their portfolio. That's the equivalent in today's price per ounce of silver of having £12,305 in silver bullion. Quite a lot. Some of you may even be lucky enough to be in that category. However, we're moving up a notch to the next 5%. So are you in the top 5% of silver holders? How much would you have to have? Well, you would have to have around 150 ounces of silver bullion. A fair old whack and a fair old weight of silver for sure. The equivalent in price, again in today's spot price per ounce for silver, would put it at roughly £3,691. I feel like that's starting to get a little bit more common. I feel like there'd be much more people that would be sitting around that 150 ounce mark of silver stackers, as most of you will have been stacking for a long time, which would have allowed you to build up a nice sized portfolio. However, you may be newer to precious metals, or your circumstances or your own personal preferences on how much you want to invest in silver might be less significant. So let's look at the top 20%. How much silver would you have to put you in the top 20% of silver bullion holders? Well, you would have to own around 50 ounces of silver bullion. And you guessed it, we're going to talk about the price. How much would that be in today's money per ounce at spot price for silver? Well, 50 ounces would be looking at around £1,230 for 50 ounces of silver. So that's the 1%, the 5%, and the 20% bracket of silver bullion holders. What category does that put you in? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, moving on, while the recommended amount of silver bullion is considered to be around 5 to 10% of your silver portfolio, exactly the same as the recommended amount in gold as well. Funnily enough, that's what they say is probably the ideal spot area to have in your portfolio, between 5 to 10% of silver in your portfolio. Now, I think possibly if you're holding 500 to 150 ounces, you may be slightly higher than that 5-10% in your portfolio. But nonetheless, whether you're at 5-10% or more, having some gold and silver is better than having none. Now, let's just talk about silver in a different light for a brief moment. You don't particularly invest in silver to get rich, but its upside chances could be greater than gold. Now, what I mean by that is I am a bit of a believer that silver isn't going to make you rich, like gold isn't also going to make you rich, but I do think there is some fantastic upside potential for silver looking forward into the future. So does that mean you should be holding the 20% mark in your portfolio, or increasing that amount to 500 ounces of silver in your portfolio? Well, if I'm accurate and I'm looking to the future correctly, then it would indicate that getting more silver might be a better idea, because there's potential chances for it to increase in value throughout the next few decades. Having said that, everyone's investment goals are different and individual. It all depends on your own personal goals and your financial circumstances. Maybe you're more focused on building passive income, creating dividends, or maybe you're looking at investing elsewhere to gain interest, whereas gold and silver is obviously a wealth preservation device. So let's not get too caught up in the figures, and don't let it deter you, because anything is better than nothing, and we're all individual at the end of the day, and it all depends on what your specific circumstances and goals are. Now, as we've talked about the percentage holdings of what puts you in the top 1%, 5%, and 20%, I'd like to take a step back and look at the value of silver and how it's increased in the last 20 years. Now, when we look at the price point of silver in the last 2 decades, in 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, silver increased by 651.06%. It went from a low of £3.26 per ounce to a high this week to £29.26 per ounce. So silver's had some fantastic growth in the last 2 decades, and I think possibly looking forward to the future, we could expect to see similar growth going forward in the next few decades. But if you are looking to look for the future, it's not always a bad idea to look at the past. Historically, looking at past investment vehicles and how they've performed could potentially give you an indication of how they might perform going forward in the not too distant future. Now, silver. We know there's a lot of it in the world, there's a big abundance of it. Now, the estimated market cap of silver is around an astonishing $1,674 billion. Now, geologists believe that silver is 19 times more abundant than gold in the Earth's crust. Silver's mining output is 8 times greater than gold. So what does that mean? Well, it tells you there is a huge abundance of silver being mined and sourced. What does that do for silver as an investment vehicle? Well, if there's a potential flood of silver bullion in the market, could we see that keeping the price of silver low? In my opinion, potentially yes. I mean, silver has historically been way below the bar when comparing it to silver. I know in the last year or two, we have seen some great spikes in silver, catching up to nearly £20 per ounce. So yes, there is a huge abundance of silver in the market. Could we see a possible source difference in the future comparing it to demand? Could we see demand increasing enough that it actually brings up the price? I think realistically that would be difficult. Looking at the fact that there is a market cap of $1,674 billion on silver, and the fact that it's 19 times more abundant than gold gives you an indication of how much silver is still out there. However, don't let these figures change your opinion on silver. I still believe that it's better to have some silver rather than none silver. For sure, I am a much more focused investor on gold. Historically, for me, I've looked at gold's data, and for me, the value of it and the wealth preservation and the hedge against inflation is much more beneficial to me, investing much more capital in gold bullion as an asset. But I do believe diversification is key, and I have faith in silver with a lot of potential for increasing its value in the next few decades. Now, talking about the next few decades, what is my prediction for silver's future? It's a good question, but I've got to be honest, and I'm going to be straight to the point. This is my opinion, doesn't mean I'm correct, and it doesn't mean I'm wrong, but I'm giving my ideas and thoughts on the future for silver. What do I think? Well, I honestly believe silver's got a promising future. I think we can see some price increases, and I think we could see demand increasing, which could potentially help increase that price. Although there is a huge market cap for silver, and as geologists say from their factual data, there is 19 times more silver in the Earth's crust than gold. That's not particularly helpful for trying to increase that price, hence why silver has probably lacked a lot behind gold's value. However, we are seeing silver's demand and usage go up significantly with the push of the greener world going forward. There's a lot of electric cars being built, solar panels, including also, not to mention, medicine and healthcare. Silver's abundance is great, but it's also being used heavily as well. We know that silver is one of the most conductive metals for electricity, so it proves very popular in the industrial market. So I do think going forward, when comparing it to the last 2 decades, I think the next 20 years from now could be very promising for silver. I think there's more chances of yielding greater results than any possible negatives. So in final conclusion, what's my opinion on silver? Well, we've gone through the fact that, you could be in the top 1%, 5%, or the top 20%. We've talked about the historical price data of silver increasing by 651%. And we've also covered how silver is extremely abundant. And we've talked about how there is 19 times more silver than gold in the Earth's crust. What does that leave me with my final opinion? Well, I think that silver is still a fantastic investment. I love it as a fun way of saving money. I think that it's a tangible asset that I can own, which allows me to have great trace and trackability of my own investment. I retain full control, which is something very important to me. I love the fact that you can get legal tender pieces like the Britannia, which are capital gains tax exempt, allowing me to avoid paying any tax on my investment. I think its future is extremely promising, and I do believe that diversification is key. So although we do pay heavy premiums and VAT on silver, I do stomach those little negatives because I believe it's important to have diversification in my investment portfolio. I do also believe that it's better to have some rather than none. And in final, I would have to say that although this is an investment channel and we're heavily focused on talking about building wealth and increasing our financial knowledge, I would leave by saying health is wealth, and after that, everything else is a bonus. So let's get it all into perspective. Everything in moderation, a little bit of everything is helpful, but also make sure you're doing everything in moderation to make sure you're happy and healthy. After that, everything else is a bonus. This has been my video on Are You Silver Rich and how much puts you in the top 1%. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have and you're new to the channel, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to see more content your way. And if you have really enjoyed, let me know in the comment section below. I would really love to know your thoughts if you enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing you all in the very next episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.